Okay, we're now live streaming my studio practice. Welcome. And we're at the very early stage of a new one. So I have begun this. Here's the sketch. So I had this idea for a Quetzal because it's a very nice green and red combo. But really, it was the idea that the Quetzal has this fabulously long tail, and I imagined it coming down the fingerboard of the guitar and acting as a streamer at the side of the guitar. And then I let my imagination wander. So I had this board stained already, and I kind of mapped out a thirds arrangement. So 3/3 that way, 3/3 this way to give a kind of knots and crosses board arrangement, and that helped me decide where I wanted to place different items. So I've got two Quetzals, and this large one is perching on top of the guitar, but because of its proximity, you can't see how fabulous its tail is, and now we're just ready to go. There's a little change here. I had a palette as a kind of halo round about here. So I'm not actually sure what I'm going to do with this part now. And the eyeball is non-existent. So I think I might have to turn this into an eye that streams out into this kind of waterfall. Um, as you can see, the drawing has undergone a few corrections, quite a few corrections. And now I just want to get started. Now, the reason that this is happening at all is um, because I'm using linseed oil, water mixable linseed oil with the other paintings. Um, they're taking a lot longer to dry, and so I need to have something to occupy myself in my studio practice in the interim period. And so here we are. I want to work from my darkest values, so I'm going to take this Rosemary and Co. #1 ivory short flat brush, a little bit of water off screen, into some olive green, and just block in my darks. So this could do with a little bit more mixing, but it's just water. And so I think I'll just block it in. What I'm doing is I'm trying to create a kind of ragged edge here at the outside of the Quetzal, because their heads are fabulously spiky. And also, I think the proportions in the original drawing were wrong. This is also a slightly different way of working for me in that I don't tend to um, work this way, in the sense that I make the drawing by painting. I tend to do a little bit of mapping of the drawing first. So actually drawing with the paint to create the image, and then if I want to move it around, is a little bit different for me. Normally, um, the drawing is mapped out, and we make kind of it's a question of blocking in colouring in the existing shapes. Now I can't remember whereabouts exactly the green on the Quetzal stops. Because there's it's a bit like a robin. There's a bit where there's a kind of curve where the red takes over. But anyway, this olive is going to be a very nice background colour, and it can only be lighter from this point on. It's also a very shiny bird, so it's got a lot of iridescence, and that's the thing that it has in common with the hummingbirds. And iridescence is the thing that fascinates me about the hummingbirds and about a lot of these tropical birds, these Costa Rican birds. We were due to go back to Costa Rica this year, but unfortunately because of COVID, we had to cancel our plans, as many people have had to do. And so Quetzal watching was fairly high on the list. Okay. I do know about the form of the bird is that there's going to be a tucked under kind of chin part there, so that needs to be really dark to make it look as if there's a ball sitting on top of a column for the neck. So I do need that to be fairly dark, especially that triangle there. Another thing is they have this kind of curious arrangement on the beak where it's the side of the head is like two very feathery bits of bread sandwiching the beak in between, and so there's a kind of interlacing of the feathers which goes above and below the beaks, a bit like my fingers are trying to demonstrate here. So that's going to be interesting. So already having done these other bird paintings lately, I feel a little bit more confident to give it a go. And if nothing else happens from these sessions that my studio sessions that I'm uploading, I at least would like to think that my desire to experiment on camera has encouraged someone else to explore their creativity. That's usually my sign-off line, but it is an important thing for me to feel that somewhere in the future someone is going to watch these. I must learn how to market myself a little bit better. But I don't, because that involves energy that I'd rather spend on painting. Okay, so the bird will frame the guitar on this side and down this side. So it has this kind of idea that the bird is actually tapering down into the guitar and framing it. So I'll do that and suggest that the tail and the extraordinary feathers that it has are disappearing somewhere outside of the picture plane. So that's okay. Next feature that I wish to include is a kind of pole here, here. So by putting these strokes either side in the kind of negative space, I'm hoping to frame, you see where the pole is, and then typically I have a Costa Rican flag for these paintings. So I've done enough of them to know that there are recurring features. But this is a new one, and also what I want to do is have, now if the dark here is showing the positive form in relief, these darks here are tall verticals that I'm considering here and here to stop the viewer's eye from travelling out the page. And similarly here with this bird, with this one, which is the distant version of this one. It's tall enough to prevent the eye from wandering out. Hopefully. Okay, so I'm going to need a smaller brush. This is a 0. So again, it's Rosemary & Co. It's an ivory short flat brush. What I'm noticing is that they're showing signs of wear and tear already. And they're the same age as the other brushes that I've got. And so I think what I need to do is explore a similar brush. It doesn't mean that it's a bad brush, it just means that what it's made up of experiences wear and tear a lot quicker, and so there must be an alternative out there. But it's enough to block in this shape here. And that's good enough for me at this moment. So I'm noticing as well that, you know, some of these actions are now becoming slightly more well rehearsed, and so there will be the sensation that you know, I will have achieved slightly more by the end of this session than typically in other sessions. So yes, I know this red is really, really shocking, but on the Quetzal there is a really strong green-red contrast, and also a feature of the bird is it has these kind of finger-like feathers, like epaulettes, framing. We're coming over across and into the belly area, which is a nice detail. And I'm not sure how far up this headstock is, but I do want this red. I do want to celebrate this lovely red-green combination. And so I might push the headstock down a little bit to make way for this detailing. So we've used colours that should be familiar to anybody who has been following the live stream so far. This is cadmium red light, and it's being offset against the um, olive green. So now that doesn't make quite as much sense as it did. That the foot looks a little bit high if the headstock is lower, so I can just nudge that down a little bit. Okay. So like I say, it's a bit unusual for me to, use paint to move around the features so much. So it's quite an interesting departure for me. So I'm just going to block the same in here. But with slightly more abandon, less attention to detail. Okay, so yeah, this bird is on my life list, so I would like to be able to say that I had seen it at some point. Another colour that is a familiar is burnt umber or raw umber. And so the eye is going to be, black. So what I'm going to do is take some raw umber, I think, which is cooler than the burnt umber. And I'm going to take one of my rigger brushes and only mixing with water, which I'm allowing to go dirty in order to desaturate the colours. So I've spoken about this before. So the eyeball will be in here. So if I go in with burnt or raw umber, there we go. If you see the birds, you'll see they've actually got quite nice, did I say it, smiley eyes? So, well, this is what I'm doing. Just completely blacken it in. So there's the burnt umber, the raw umber. And then when that's dry and I come back to it with French ultramarine blue, it will make nice black. So the same thing with a little bit olive green. For the thumb hole, of the mixing palette. Although I'm not actually sure what's going to happen here. I'll just block that in just now. And already I can see that the painting is beginning to form without all the fussiness of drawing that I typically do. Okay, and I will use the same burnt umber with a little green bias to put in that post, which is going to support the Costa Rican flag. So it's not flowing like ink yet. So what I've done is the application was quite thick and using water just to spread it out on the surface, roughly. Okay, so we're getting places. again with the raw umber to correct my drawing. So my drawing is now wrong. Usually there's a kind of eyeball feature in there somewhere. So carrying on that rule, for want of a better expression, I'm going to make the whole of the sound hole become the dark part of the pupil. And make the eyeball extend this away. And similarly on the underside. There we go. And that same raw umber will show where the headstock meets the bird. And just give a suggestion of the detail of where the rollers are going to be. Okay, that's fine. So already in a short time, there's a suggestion that the painting is coming along. I'm actually enjoying using the raw umber. From the tube, it's quite nice and pliable. It wants to move, so it's not really needing a lot to thin it out to make it that particularly inky way that I like at this stage. So a river is flowing from the sound hole eyeball pupil, reminiscent of the previous large painting I was doing. So there's a kind of thematic thing going on to working in series. And also the kind of waterfall idea. So this first part of the water drops and widens onto a second part, which drops and widens onto a third part, and I haven't really decided what happens with this section. But like the large painting, that's been the focus of most of my live streams this month. It looks like there's a convergence of two waterfalls, which is well, scientifically improbable. If not impossible. So what I'm doing is I'm revisiting the olive green with this raw umber, and I'm working wet and wet. But my main idea is to create this dark, which casts a shadow between the neck and the rounded kind of fluffy head that they have, and that's worked quite nice. Umber does in fact mean shadow, so it's an ideal colour for shadow. And also put this little dark area in here and here to show that, a bit like an Oreo biscuit. You're looking at one side of the Oreo biscuit and you've got the other side of Oreo biscuit, and the beak and the meat of the head are the filling in the Oreo cookie. Okay. So, all this talk of food, and I've just had my dinner, and I'm dreaming of Oreos. So, similarly here, what I want to do is get my darks in. And while there is the absence of light, actual light in these Elassomorph paintings, so they're just really doodles. I do want to create areas of believable form, and that form is modelled by light and dark. So I'm trying to push this bit, which is going under the body towards the headstock there, into a kind of shadow area, and leave a little highlight for the shoulder. Not so prominent here, but I'm kind of hoping that if I do the similar darkening of the underside, like here and here, that should make those areas pop out a little bit more. So by adding that dark, in a sense, it makes that a little bit lighter. So compared with the other paintings that I've done, where I've been working quite slowly, this one seems to be galloping along. And I would recommend to people to give working in series a go. It's where you have a similar theme and do several at the one time. But the thing about a series is you can revisit it all along your artistic career. I think there was an artist called Richard Diebenkorn, and he made the Ocean Drive series of paintings, and he just kept revisiting and visiting and visiting at different points in his career, and just picked up where he left off. Another shadow area here would be between the toes. So by darkening these bits here, the positive form of the toes hopefully emerges. I want to do that there and that there, so that this bird has a good grip of the guitar. Okay, so I think that that is reasonable. Next is yellow ochre. Again, I have been using yellow ochre quite a lot. Burnt sienna. Yellow ochre is a favourite colour, a favourite earth colour that I like to use. And here I'm going to use the larger of my two flats, and even at this it's quite a small brush, and just block in with local colour, so a colour approximating the colour that I'm looking for. I should actually do some research into the actual shape of paint palettes, because this one has just become a go-to for my painting style, painting theme. Okay, so again, just using water, because these are Winsor & Newton water mixable oils. Just blocking in a rough approximate colour. And knowing that I can correct my drawing at any time. That's fine. So yes, I'm already feeling a lot more confident just using these paints, just by the live streaming that I've been doing the last little while. So there's no substitute for experience, and that experience can give a little bit confidence. What I'm noticing this time round is, unlike the fully drawn out version that I did with the big Elassomorph, the main one that we've been doing this month, which involved a lot of very careful filling in, I noticed that I'm not doing that with this. So I'm feeling that there's a little bit more abandon to what I'm doing. So I'm being a little bit more fluent, I suppose, in my handling of the paint, just by virtue of experience gained. So that neck's now beginning to look very scrawny. It's looking very, yeah, vulnerable. Okay. Now, wow, that yellow ochre is looking very, very yellow against the dark of that head. But I know from experience that the light oil paints dry darker, and the dark applications of oil paint dry lighter. So they do the kind of opposite of each other. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'm creating a kind of halo here around this. Okay, I am quite pleased with that so far. So again, there's the sensation of having achieved a lot in a little, and for me that's very important because of my regularly mentioned ME, chronic fatigue condition. So for me to get a quick dividend, a big dividend for a small outlay is very, very important to me. Yeah. So this area is the area that is going to be checked like a chessboard And I'm going to try something a little bit different. Hopefully I do actually have a black in my mix. Yes, I do. And a lot of artists kind of shun using black. They think that it's dull and dead, and to them that may be their experience of the colour. But what I think is that even if it is dull and dead, we actually need dull and dead patches to throw the lively and colourful patches into relief. And so, because I want to, I'm going to be making a black out of brown, one of my browns, so probably raw umber and French ultramarine. I'm kind of hoping that if there is a deadness to this ivory black, it will show up as a contrast, just in case it comes into contact with the black that I make. So again, I'm applying it actually quite thickly today. And I know these are oil paints, but in the mix of each recipe, there are different amounts of oil. And so it'd be quite interesting when you're painting to document how each paint comes out of the tube. Some of it needs a little bit extra, some of it needs less. So my experiment here is a time-saving thing. In my large painting that I've been talking about, the large example for this month, I've lost my line there. I painted individual black and white squares, and it occurred to me that I only needed to block in the area either white, and then I would only need to fuss over the black squares, or black, and then I would only need to fuss over the white squares. And while I actually enjoy the sensation of colouring in those sections, I am looking for a high return on my energy. So I guess that's why I'm trying to paint so fast today. So the plan is that if I paint this black, I can just come in later and paint in the white squares. But I noticed with the last one, so another feature of the works is extending out of the picture plane. So that's something that's been happening quite a lot. With the previous painting, I discovered that if you put white on top of the black, then the white becomes influenced and there's a kind of marbled look. And so the challenge is to put white on top of black so that the black underneath influences the white and helps create an illusion of marbling. Ideally, if I was working much bigger, I would love to get proper marbling on. Uh, a person on YouTube who does it very well is Greg Crayola Simpkins. He does very, very nice detailing in his work. And because he works so big, that enables that process. Okay, I had heard that black dries very, very quickly, but I didn't think it would happen over the course of me just laying this down. It's already beginning to dry out very quickly. I've already been thinking about next steps for my art and what I'm doing by painting, basically rainforest creatures in my own jungle of the imagination. That has led me to look again at the paintings of Henri Rousseau, and I have been looking at his art the last little while, very recently, and I have noticed that there's a lot of black in his work. And I think the idea is that the darkness of the jungle is a kind of psychological darkness, because at that time, not everybody knew what a jungle was like, and there was all sorts of fears and imaginations and all sorts of things going on, which created a fashion for it in Paris at the time. Um, but also, it acts as a very strong foil for the light colours that go on top. I hadn't really planned this, but this really feels like it wants to sweep back out again in this direction. And so I'm going to go with that for just now and see what happens in the future. So, yep, this is ivory black. There are other blacks, and you'd think that all blacks are just the same, it's just black. But there's ivory black, there's carbon black, so I don't understand the difference between that, because ivory is organic, and so if you burnt it, it would be carbon, because it comes from a carbon-based life form. So the fact that we have carbon black and ivory black is curious to me. There's also another one which is lamp black, which originated from the soot of burning lamps. So on the surface of it all, they just look black. But it's when you start adding things like white and you make your mixes through grey to lighter different tints of the colour, is that their characteristic comes out. And so that might be an interesting demonstration to do at some point. So I'm enjoying putting directional strokes in, because I can see them on the surface. I can see the strokes being reflected in directions of the thing. And so my other go-to technique is sgraffito. And I think what I will do is I will see if I can scratch where the squares ought to go. Like so. I'll try another one this way. And another one out that way. And create my kind of offset checkerboard, which is another feature of my work lately. I actually feel I could get away with a few more, so maybe there, maybe here, in a curved manner. Okay, and it kind of bulges and flows. I suppose in the way that the elaborate tail of the Quetzal does in real life. So, but only in the male. Here, I've made a separation between the black and the olive area, which was the body of the Quetzal, so that there's a suggestion of light and the illusion of form again. So that was something that I wanted to do. Here's, I can have another stroke that way, and possibly even another one this way, because I do like checking. Okay. So this session is very nearly coming to a close, but not quite, because another regular feature of these Elassomorph paintings is a sky which, against the olive staining, shows where the treetops are. So I'm getting my cerulean blue out and my titanium white. So, and this time round, I really want to make it's more white than blue. So, I want to try and get there sort of fairly quickly. In the other painting, I went quite dark and then had to lighten some areas. And so now what I'm keen to do is just go in with a fairly sky value. But I don't want it too strongly blue, so I do have to nudge it back with something. And that something is a little bit of yellow ochre, just to dull it down a little bit, just a tad. And it's going to be here. So the sky is going to be in the waterfall. So I'm hoping that my lights are going to dry darker, because looking at it on the surface, it does seem very light, and I'm inclined to go into the blue a little bit more. But even so, this is just the block in, and we can revisit these areas. We can revisit these areas and darken or lighten as we wish. Okay, so I've been asking my wife her opinion about these artworks, and she just thinks that they're too busy. And yet it's the busyness of them that I'm enjoying doing, because they're really a reflection of my mental state. They actually describe what's going on in my head. So since the majority of these things are originating from my imagination. Right, so normally what happens is from the side of the guitar we have kind of flower forms that break up the area. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to anticipate that the flower forms are going to come out into here somewhere. And so I'm going to leave a little space for the flower forms to grow into. Like so. And leave a space to suggest the form of the guitar when I decide what shape it's going to take, what kind of space it's going to occupy. And so okay. Yeah, I'm really enjoying a sensation of more uh, free painting. I went in a little bit more of the blue, so but even at that, it doesn't show up. And also, I'm noticing that I'm using a lot more paint, so it's going on in a kind of creamy fashion. I would describe myself possibly as, in terms of using paint, I'm quite a stingy painter. Um, okay, so that looks fairly simple. And for the sky, again, the idea is just to dip in places and go back up in places. And by doing that, the olive becomes a kind of a tree line. You kind of create a tree line where the crowns of, oh, there's a nice one. That suggested itself. Okay, that was quite a reasonable one. Okay, and I've got an idea for another halo for that part behind that bird. So while I was in Costa Rica, I visited a coffee farm. Coffee's very, very important to me. And they had carts for transporting the loads, and they were decorated very nicely indeed, very in a very highly detailed manner. So the wheels in particular had this really strong detailing. So that's my flagpole there. Maybe my sky can afford to come down. No, it can't. So it has to be on this side. Okay. Back in again. And that's a lot bluer there. Okay, so the flagpole is obviously carrying the Costa Rican flag because that's been a recurring theme of this particular series. And so that flag needs to go in. And I have noticed that French ultramarine blue is the ideal blue, unmixed, that describes the flag. So the flag is going to be here somewhere and slightly on a diagonal. And so it would skirt round there and come around here. And I'm going to stop on the inside of that bird detail. So actually, for the amount of flag that I've presented, that's possibly the right thickness. Maybe I can get away with a little bit more. And sort of stretch reality a little bit, because that's what these paintings are about. So now you can see, with the flag being in there, you can see where the tops of the tree line is going to be. In fact, I'm inclined to come back up again on the other side. Okay, that's that. Now, it's not exactly white, it's the sky colour, but it will do for just now. So that will be the white coming in there. Let me get back to it. I am keen to create a flag which is modulated by blowing in the wind. And so that would suggest some greys. So the white would never actually be pure white. Now on the flag, the red element is double thickness. So the blue, the white are single thickness, the red is double thickness, and again is reflected in the bird. So a little bit more water to help that flow. Okay, yep, that did it. So increase the thickness of that band of colour. Okay, and then back into the white and the blue. So let's go in with the blue. So there would be white there, and the blue would be the last part, which is about there, single thickness. Okay, so I now strongly believe that something needs to be here. So maybe if it's foliage forms coming up, that might help. Okay. So I announced that that was this installment finishing and the just sheer love of painting has kept me going. But now I think that's time. I think it's time to say that that's enough is enough. There's a rudimentary foot there and a rudimentary foot here, just suggested briefly, and that will wait for me to come back sometime tomorrow or later. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I hope to see you again for the next one. It's a decent amount of work. I'm glad to have shared this time with you. Okay. Bye bye.